we move on to item 14. And I'd move, and Councillor Dalton would like to second the Chair's recommendations, and then we'll go to a presentation. We've got Parul and Sarah and Tanya. It's a bit of a presentation on this, on the full waste minimisation plan.
Kia ora koutou. So this is the most exciting item of the day, I believe, because it's talking about rubbish. We are here to bring to you the findings of our consultation on the draft waste plan. And this is the third one that I have been involved with. So there's a lot of history there. But I believe the team's done an awesome job in terms of getting us here today. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for your guidance in terms of how we are shepherding waste management and minimization in the city. So there is a bit of a presentation, as the chair said, because we do want to take you through what is it that we received from the community and what are we planning in terms of, or proposing in terms of what the plan says going forward, and also your direction on the fortnightly rubbish collections as well. So I've got Sarah and Tanya with me, who will take us through a presentation and then look at questions. Kia ora.
Thanks, Parul. So I'll just start off with a little bit of context setting. The draft plan continues that zero waste by 2040 direction of previous plans, but with more focus on actions to reduce waste in the first place. That's repair and reuse items. It's based on stakeholder input and robust research captured in a separate waste assessment and includes a separate Hauraki Gulf Islands plan as an appendix. So we consulted on the plan in February and March this year, providing people with a feedback form which asked about their support for the direction of the plan and about 5 of the key priorities within the waste plan that are circled on this slide. So there are 7 other priorities outlined in the plan, and together these illustrate our direction in managing household and commercial waste across the region. We also asked people about their thoughts on the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan and any other comments. After consultation in May and June, we workshopped the consultation results with local boards and received their resolutions. We've also met with the Waste Political Advisory Group and the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee. Today we're at that final step for your approval of the plan, and also the proposal to transition to a fortnightly rubbish collection subject to further long-term plan consultation and decision making. But before going into that fortnightly rubbish proposal, I do have 4 slides on the submissions that we received and the other recommended changes within the plan. So we've previously talked through the submission results. So this slide is just a high-level reminder that there was really good support from the public on the direction of the plan and those 4 initiatives named on our feedback form, especially those focuses on litter and illegal dumping and construction and demolition waste. And also a reminder that we heard from Te Ahi Waru and Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei in particular about the need to continue our work with iwi to develop Te Ao Māori principles around waste and prioritise development with industry about a waste and resource recovery infrastructure plan, along with aligning the Auckland Unitary Plan with strategic waste planning. Parakore Marae also strongly supported the direction of the plan, though they expected to see a little more at the top of the waste hierarchy. All 21 local boards provided feedback in which there was a really high level of support for the overall plan and the key priorities, especially illegal dumping, the resource recovery network, moving up the waste hierarchy and product stewardship. They suggested increased educational campaigns to get people to reduce waste or recycle right. They had suggestions linked to the inorganic collection service and improving access to that. And some boards advocated for community recycling centres in their area or made comments about waste to energy and incineration as an opportunity, or one board was against that in principle. There were concerns about fortnightly collections, which we'll talk to in the next half of the presentation. So we've recommended changes to the plan in this report to strengthen the terminology and actions in driving up the waste hierarchy, along with actions around litter and illegal dumping. So I've got a little bit more on that on the next slide. There's new actions to strengthen the collection of data and to be more inclusive in working across diverse communities. We've also reflect on the role of the Auckland Unitary Plan and our recommended changes and the need for large-scale waste infrastructure strategy. That's responding to that iwi feedback, for example. So this means that there are these new actions in the plan. These are just a few of them. You'll see that they include developing a program of repair initiatives. There's actions around litter and illegal dumping to include a behaviour change program and marine rubbish cleanups with our partners, and also understanding the sources of plastic pollution and their impacts so we can better direct our efforts. These actions complement a number of other litter actions, illegal dumping actions already outlined in the plan. It means we'll be putting further funding to these initiatives. We also recommend an action supporting community compost solutions and the extension of our food scraps collection service, and an action around better understanding the impacts of the resource recovery network. And that final point is around biosolids, which is the nutrient-rich leftovers from processing our wastewater. So we've done some extra work with Watercare and the regulatory team to make sure that we capture the need to look at the regulatory barriers to reusing that valuable resource. So that's the overview, and I'll hand over to Sarah.
Kia ora koutou. So I'll take you through the response back that we had back from the fortnightly rubbish collections. So as you'll be aware, we had a mixed consultation response to the proposal to move to fortnightly rubbish collections. And so feedback from the written submission showed that we had 47% either supported this or unsure, and 53% were unsupportive. So our experience at the Have Your Say events was quite different, where 56% of the people that we had spoke to were actually supportive. We think this is because we could actually have conversations with people about the main drivers for the proposal, as well as with individuals around their personal situations, including ways to reduce waste, deal with odours, which was concerns, or how to use their food scraps collections, and the reassurance that the food scraps collections would continue on a weekly basis. And the third pie there on the slide there combines feedback from submissions and your Have Your Say events, where you've shown sort of that 50-50 split between those who were supportive or unsupportive. Those who were supportive or didn't know made comments about how a fortnightly collection would suit their needs, that the food scraps service had really made a difference, that it might reduce cost, or they noted benefits. They noted other benefits around reduced landfill or environmental other outcomes. Those who were unsupportive, they were concerned about whether or not they would be able to cope, smells, rats or other pests, and about the impacts on illegal dumping, or they noted issues around the food scrap service. In terms of local boards, 13 were unsupportive of the proposal. 4 boards stated that they didn't support fortnightly collections for their specific areas or without further measures being in place. 3 boards didn't state a position, and 1 board was supportive. And then the key themes there for the local boards are noted on the slides. So this proposed move to fortnightly collections is not new. You'll have heard from us many times about it, as it's the final part of our 14-year marathon to provide consistent and affordable region-wide services that meet Auckland Council's commitment to minimise, and our statutory commitment to minimise curbside household waste. It follows the introduction of a standardised region-wide 3-bin collection service and the implementation of a region-wide rates-funded charging mechanism for rubbish collections, which will start from the 1st of December this year across the region. So, as mentioned, all councils have a statutory responsibility to minimise waste in their areas, and Auckland Council plays a significant role in influencing domestic waste reduction and the emissions it produces. Although domestic waste only accounts for 15 to 20% of Auckland's waste streams, we collect rubbish, recycling and food scraps from close to 1/3 of the nation's households. And so the decisions that this council makes are significant for the whole country's domestic waste footprint. Almost 70% of food waste in landfill originates from households, which means that curbside waste contributes a disproportionate 30% of the total emissions from landfill due to its high organic content. This means that varying our curbside collection is where council can directly influence the amount of household waste going to landfill and, importantly, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We've spoken a lot to this committee about the extensive research we've undertaken to support the move to fortnightly collections. We've drawn all of this together and included it as an appendix to the proposed waste plan as attachment C. This comprehensively outlines research from overseas right through to the bin volume surveys that we conducted on over 2,000 households, spread across over 100 Auckland streets in June and July this year. Through this, we demonstrated that if Aucklanders used the bins available to them, less than 6% of households would not be able to cope on a fortnightly collection using a medium-sized 120-litre bin, and less than 1% of Auckland households would not be able to cope on a fortnightly collection with a larger 240-litre bin. A fortnightly rubbish collection also helps avoid additional amenity and health and safety issues associated with the number of bins placed on the curbside every week for collection. And we regularly hear from the Auckland Disability Advisory Panel that that would be of benefit for the wheelchair users and others who struggle on those crowded pavement spaces. We also know that traffic congestion and wear and tear on roads is a concern for Auckland road users. And while we already minimise this collection impact by collecting earlier in the morning along those arterial roads, by sizing the collection frequency to what Aucklanders actually need, we can further reduce both congestion and the physical impact on our road networks. So within the draft plan, we have targets reducing our domestic curbside waste to landfill, and this aligns with the direction of the New Zealand waste strategy, so we are required to have regard to that. Our domestic waste targets are based on the introduction of the food scrap service and a shift to fortnightly collections, as has been signalled within each of our previous 2 waste plans. And it's worth noting that the targets proposed in the draft plan are fairly modest compared with what Hamilton and New Plymouth have already achieved with their shift to fortnightly rubbish collections. The evidence brought to committee in earlier years relied on experience from overseas, and since then 18 New Zealand councils have now transitioned to fortnightly collections with some impressive drops in their curbside landfill waste. In recent months, we have contacted or recontacted all of these councils to understand more about the drivers for introducing this change, the services they offer, the impact of the change and how their communities have responded. 2/3 of respondents to our survey cited reducing waste to landfill, and 1/3 cited improving the usage of their food scrap service as the primary driver for reducing collection frequency. Service cost reductions were also achieved by offering a comprehensive collection service based on need across all waste and resource collections. So in terms of waste minimisation, Hamilton and New Plymouth are the leaders in this space, with Tauranga fast catching up. But we've made some notable gains in Auckland, since the introduction of the food scrap service last year. Our curbside waste to landfill per year has dropped from 139 kilos to 126 kilos per person per year. But we also asked these 18 councils about their community's response. All councils reported that although there was some anxiety in leading up to the change, the service settled quickly as new routines were established. We also asked whether and how additional bin capacity was provided. Only 5 of the 18 councils offer larger or additional residual waste bins, and the main examples are listed on the slide. Similar options could be explored as part of an implementation plan for Auckland. So, for example, Tauranga, they offer 3 bags for their transfer stations. Thames Coromandel have weekly collections in peak holiday times. In Central Otago, larger families with young children are given the option of an additional medium-sized bin or to upsize their bin to a 240-litre bin after a 3-month settlement period. And Dunedin City Council allows an additional medium-sized general waste bin for residents with unavoidable waste needs, so like medical needs. So this additional bin is supplied via an application process that includes a sign-off with a relevant medical professional without disclosing any private medical information. So there's often misunderstanding or confusion about the different size bins available, including what's included in the targeted rate. So here gives us sort of 3 different options available. There are actually 24 different combinations of bin sizes that are available that are we've shown in the in our attachment. So we offer unparalleled flexibility to our residents compared with other areas. And then currently about 88% of households across Auckland have that standard size bin, with 9% the larger and 3% the smaller. One of the most cited concerns that we've heard and we've explored is how large families would cope. And we know that although Auckland has proportionately more large households than other New Zealand cities, so 2% compared with 1% of the national average, only 8,000 of our 500,000 households would be classified as large, so that's 8+ people. We've spoken to this committee before about the large household study that we completed in 2022. In this household, we took these households through the introduction of the food scrap service and shift to fortnightly collections over a 10-week period. We appreciate the sample was small, but the results were impressive, as are on the slide. And this backs up our recent audit of bins and an earlier study in 2009 of households with overfull bins in areas with a high proportion of large households, which found that over half the bin volume was taken up by recyclables and food. So we're already working with social housing providers, including Tamaki Regeneration and Kāinga Ora, to discuss how the needs of their tenants could be met in a fortnightly rubbish scenario. Both have already committed to providing adequate capacity for their bins and reflecting that in their policies. We also propose working with landlords associations and to assist private tenants in ensuring that available capacity meets their needs. But we acknowledge that there will be households who may be still too large or with too many young children or high medical waste needs who may need extra support. An additional bin isn't necessarily our preferred option because it undermines the underlying premise of limiting capacity but also triggers operational requirements. But we do have examples, as I mentioned before, of where this has already worked. And so shift to fortnightly would definitely include options to look at how we would support households in this way, including potentially an option of waiving fees to ensure that these households are not left behind. And that's something that would need to be discussed further by committee. And we were also already working with the local health boards and the industry on options to deal with home medical waste, and it's an action that's outlined in the plan. But we know that extensive communications and engagement form part of any service change, as we demonstrated with the food scrap service, and a service rollout in February 27 would provide a 2.5-year lead-in time with plenty of opportunity to target increased diversion options for special needs. So, given the mixed public views and concerns related to the proposed move to fortnightly rubbish collection service, and based on elected member feedback at a workshop in July with the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee, we've put forward 3 options for the proposed fortnightly rubbish collection service, which outline it in paragraphs 11, 12 and 13 of the report to committee. So in short, these options are: option 1, proceed straight away, moving to a fortnightly rubbish collection as a priority action within the plan, and that would be subject to an LTP consultation starting in February 2027. Option 2, to agree to consult on a trial to inform a future decision on a region-wide implementation, which would result in a rollout from 2028. And then option 3, to retain that status quo of a weekly rubbish collection service across the region. And there's further information on these options in attachment 6 and attachment 7. In the following slides, I'll just briefly outline these options in terms of both waste and emissions, as well as timelines for consulting and decision making. So if we, under option 1, we'd introduce fortnightly collections in 27, and then our forecast suggests that fortnightly refuse collections will lead to our 2030 target being reached. Option 2 is a similar profile with a year delay, but we do believe that we would be close to reaching the target. And under option 3, continuing with weekly collections, we'd need to increase the food scrap set-out rate by other means, for example, more education and marketing or fines and enforcement. But we do believe the increased success could potentially mean that we'd reach our 2028 target, but we're not confident that we would reach the 2030 target, as shown by the pink line on the graph. In terms of options on the timelines, this is a simplified version of what you have in your pack already. And under option 1, even under option 1, there would need to be further consultation as part of next year's annual plan to reflect the change in the long-term plan for a February 2027 rollout. And this would still give more than 2 years to prepare Aucklanders for this change. Under option 2, we'd propose preparing for a trial, including consultation with affected households, with a trial starting in February 26. And by this time, all Auckland households would be on a rates-funded refuse service. And based on this assessment, a decision would need to be made to confirm inclusion of the fortnightly collections within the consultation for the following year's annual plan, with a decision in 2027 and a rollout the following February. So why do a trial? There are some benefits of doing a trial. And, we'd be able to address key concerns of Aucklanders, including things I've mentioned about their ability to cope, and the perception about increased litter and illegal dumping, and also the perception about increased odour or pests. The trial would also enable us to assess impact on costs and waste reduction in Auckland with more accuracy. And the test options, and we'd also be able to test options to support high waste producing households, as outlined already. The trial may also allow us to test options to incentivise and reward ultra-low waste households. So the parameters that we've looked at. So more details on the trial, they're provided in paragraphs 40 to 45 of the report and appended at attachment J. And this include the parameters for choosing areas, operational considerations, and then also, importantly, how we would measure success. And I think it's self-explanatory up there that we'd be looking for a mix of households that were representative of the varied demographics in Auckland, where there was existing services, so curbside food scraps and rates-funded collections, and making sure that it was of appropriate scale, including cost and affordability to deliver the service, while ensuring that it's scalable regionally and of a size that would demonstrate impact. There are also some operational constraints that we would need to look into that look at as a contained geographical area, what the impacts would on the collection, from a collection perspective, including routing and resource implications, what those operational things, and then what the opportunity is to incorporate RFID technology to support the delivery of the objectives and outcomes. Importantly as well, we'd look at local impacts, so probably avoid those areas that have already been impacted by significant roadworks or flooding. We estimate that the cost of the trial, based on 10,000 household, would be between 1.4 million and 1.7 million for the year, and that can be funded through the waste levy. And the breakdown of that is provided in paragraphs 78, 85 of the report. So we have provided a detailed assessment of the benefits, weaknesses, risks and mitigations of each of the options in attachment H, and the summary provided in the report. We believe that option 1 has the greatest benefits from reducing waste and supporting the food scrap service, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing costs without compromising equity and fairness. And we note that written submissions on the fortnightly proposal from the public were evenly split between those who didn't support and those that either did or were unsure or expressed conditional support. And our experience from talking to people at the AK Have Your Say events was that support was greater when people understood the benefits and scope of the proposal, that the weekly fortnight food scraps would continue and that it did not apply to multi-units on a non-standard service. Staff therefore recommend that the committee approve the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan as set out in attachment A, B and C, which includes option 1, and proceed with the fortnightly rubbish collection service as a priority action from 2027. So just briefly, the plan has been written based on option 1, consistent with the direction of the previous 2 plans, and we just outlined some of the changes that we would recommend to accompany that to support what we have heard and through the consultation. If the committee supports either option 2 or 3, staff recommend that the plan be approved subject to changes to align the plan as outlined in table 4 of the report, with delegation to the chair and deputy chair of this committee and a member of the Hokora to approve the changes. So next steps will depend on the option chosen, and here's a reminder of the timelines for options 1 and 2. So all options include adoption of the overall plan, which will enable us to meet our statutory requirements to review our waste plan every 6 years. And just to, this plan is the cornerstone policy to achieve Auckland's vision of zero waste by 2040. And once adopted, it will be the guiding document for achieving effective and efficient waste management and minimisation in Auckland for the next 6 years.
Now you can breathe, Sarah. That was fantastic. There was a huge amount of complex information given to us, so thank you. And also just want to acknowledge that this is your last day with the waste team, and you'll be moved, I think you're already moved or you're about to move to become the head of capability and strategy for Auckland Emergency Management. But I guess just want to acknowledge from my long period of working with you of Environment and Climate Change Committee in this committee that she's staying with the organisation, don't worry. just to make it clear, the Mayor said, what a shame, you find someone good and they bugger off. So take that as a big compliment here. No, I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work you've done on several waste plans. This lot of work, the community recycling centres, also a huge amount of change and work with the government, the waste levy, all sorts of different things. So it's been huge, and I know that you've put your whole life sometimes into this work, and I know that will be the same as you move to Auckland Emergency Management. So I know that sometimes we make your life very tough, but thank you very much. Now, the focus of the report, even though the staff had heard our feedback and community feedback, still was based on the advice and the evidence that fortnightly, obviously fortnightly is one tiny part of the overall waste plan, but just to let you know again, and I sent them around this morning, that the Mayor sort of suggested at the workshop, how about a trial? He heard the room was about half-half as well, and myself and Councillor Dalton have worked with the staff on recommendations for a trial, and that is what the recommendations are from the Chair. So because I have heard that I don't think there was a majority for a move to fortnight, but I'm happy to talk to that soon. But we'll go to questions, but just to be clear that currently the motions on the table are for the trial, so think about your questions, may change. Cool. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, team, for all of your work in this space as well. I've got 4 questions, Chair, and they're quite different questions. The first question, you said that only 8% of households in Auckland count as large households, with more than 8 people in them. That seems to be quite different to my grassroots view of the areas that I live in. So are you able to break that down in terms of local board, and can you make a comment in terms of, for example, the Manukau local boards? Is it around that amount? What percentage of households in areas like mine in Manukau and our neighbours in Manurewa, Papakura, for example, would be considered large households? Kia ora. And then I've got 3 more questions.
Yeah, through the chair, no, absolutely. So we were basing this on the 2018 census, which is the most recent that we have. We know the other census data has just come out, but we don't yet have it to be able to do that level of analysis. We do know that that for the Auckland as a whole, we're looking at large households of being 8+. That they are, for Auckland as a whole, it's 2% compared with the national average of 1%. But we also know that those large households are concentrated in South Auckland. So in Mangere Arahu, it's 7%, and in the census was just about 1,250 households. Manurewa is 5%, so just over 1,000, and Otara Papatoetoe is also 5%. So you are looking definitely at a concentration in those areas. And we reckon.
Kia ora, thank you. All right, second question. You said that for some of the councils who've had success, the success of the food scraps was a primary driver for the reduction in the rubbish collection. So my question is, and I know we've only just rolled out the food scrap bins, for example, in Manukau recently. So what's the uptake of the food scraps so far in our city? What success rate have we had so far across the city, but also in particular in those areas of high deprivation where we've got larger families? Kia ora.
Through the chair, what I would like to say for the councils that have rolled out food scraps outside of Auckland have done a very smart thing. They went fortnightly and they did food scraps at the same time. So for the residents or for the ratepayer, it was an easy decision to say, I have to put my smelly stuff out every week. So they took to food scraps better than what we have had in Auckland. We have, however, diverted over 30,000 tons of material, which has gone to our facility, which is a great success. And the other element of that success is because of our material going into Reparoa, that facility has actually diverted over 70,000 tons of material. And they are now looking to put biogas back into the grid. They are putting fertilizer on land. So there are big outcomes of what we have done in Auckland that's enabled greater organics coming out of landfill and getting to better reuse. In terms of our city, the set-out rate at the moment sits at about 33-35%. That means that is the percentage that is putting out the bin on the curbside every week. The concern we have is if you don't do fortnightly, people don't get onto it as quickly as they should, because they still have another option of putting their organic material in the rubbish bin.
Kia ora, thank you. Now, you talked about the reduction in waste collected per person over time, which is really good. That's really positive. Do you have data, though, corresponding data about illegal dumping? Because that's probably one of the biggest things, one of the biggest concerns we hear in our community is if we move to having less frequent rubbish collection, it's going to have an effect on what we see in terms of illegal dumping. So do you have some data on illegal dumping? Has that increased over time or not? Kia ora.
Yep, we do have data on that, and we collect it both from request for service and also by tonnage. What we are seeing is that we do, for request for service, that we have seasonal spikes in certain areas, well, in most areas, and those occur around the time you'd expect, around a lot of the Christmas and peak holiday periods. We are seeing an ever so slight incline, a slight increase in illegal dumping at the moment, and we are looking at campaigns to then tackle that, and that's one of the reasons why it's a key activity and priority within the plan. So already got plans underway and again further to increase that. We also do see illegal dumping on private land as well, and we're working through the local board initiatives. We've got 7 local boards who've signed up to our Construction Excellent programme, and that's probably going to be, we've had indications of a further 3, and that's really focusing on some of those quite annoying dumpings that we get on vacant building sites as well. So we are working in both of those areas. So in short, slight increase, but we have activities and we are putting more levy money into combating that.
If I could just add to that, whenever there's a change in level of service, we always see a change, a shift. But as an example, when we moved from multiple bags to bins out in Manukau, we did see a little bit of an increase that happened, but over time it comes down. So it's not a sustained illegal dumping increase that we see that happens because of a change in service. And I think that has been the experience that other councils have had as well. When it happens, and if it is how you manage that via communication or the support you provide to the community at that point in time, will actually tell us what will happen when you change the service.
Thank you. And my last question is around the comprehensive education plan. I can see in your report that you acknowledge that that's what's needed and that, that's part of the feedback you've gotten from the local boards as well. Now, you say in there that you are confident you can deliver that with your current funding. Can you explain how you will achieve that? Kia ora.
Through the chair, we are quite fortunate that we get a good chunk of the waste levy that comes back from central government, which is there only for minimizing waste. And the idea or the intention there is to utilize that money to put towards a greater engagement at whole levels. Like we are not just looking at doing communication campaigns, but we are looking at working with community organizations to have that engagement at a different level. We also have a plan to expand our community recycling centers, and they also act as a really good hub in the community to have that engagement as well. So the plan is to actually get that element going up and having more resources and time put into that to actually have people more engaged in raising awareness around waste minimization.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. We've got 5 questioners so far. Councillor Bartley is next.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work in this field. I just want to ask about the large household study, because when I have raised concerns about our larger households, and I was told, no, there was this study, 10 households, and that had some good results. But I wanted to confirm, did some families drop out of that study?
Through the TA, yes, there were a couple of families that did drop out of the final part of the study, and the perception that we got at the time, it wasn't so much that they couldn't cope, but they just were, it was that being sort of observed that they weren't so keen on. So although they were actually very successful in what they were doing, it was that sense of observation that they didn't want to, over a 10-week period, was quite a long period, it's quite intense for some families.
Okay, all right. So the results are probably, because it says here 5 households participated in all stages. And I just want to ask about point 32, where it says the study found that although challenging to begin with, many large households could manage with a fortnightly collection. So how do you justify that statement if it was only 5 households that continued with this full study?
Yep, we've always acknowledged that it's a small sample, and that's one of the parts that we would need to, you know, if we started in 2027 or 2028 with a trial, that we would need to expand that further. But the indications are, and the feedback we got, that it was possible with taking those 5 typical large families, working with them, that it is possible. So acknowledging it was, but some of the interventions that we were trying were very scalable, and we tried not to be to intervene too much, but just introduce the services over a 10-week period.
Just to add to that, through the chair, since then, I think we've also looked at how do you increase capacity for the exceptions. If you've got most of the city that can work with the norm, but how do you actually cater for the needs of the exceptions? And whether we look at increasing capacity beyond the 240-litre bin, which is the maximum size, and you provide that, I think as Sarah mentioned, you could have a second bin. Although it's not collected weekly, it's collected fortnightly, but you still have enough capacity to put out for collection.
Can I just ask one more? In terms of illegal dumping, does that pick up people who put their rubbish bags in your bin? And I'm wondering, are you seeing that increase when South Auckland went from multiple bags to bins?
The stats do not pick up that material because that's actually gone into somebody else's bin and it's picked up as part of your collections. So we don't quite have an understanding of whether people are putting rubbish in other people's bins. But we do not get a lot of complaints in that space where you might have otherwise neighbours complaining about others.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Hello, Parole, and good afternoon, team. And look, we'll start on this slide and deal with this one first. I mean, you're in my ward when you're these families. I have to say to you, in the past 3 days, I have met with 6 times the number of families in my ward just door knocking. So maybe I'm getting a different feedback to you. But I just wanted to confirm, where did you find those families that were subject to your qualitative and quantitative investigation?
Just to answer that through the chair, it was through a community partner to our Ora Trust who worked with those communities. So they found the families that had large households and small children.
Okay, well, we'll talk about them another day because they're another topic. But with respect to the families that bailed out, so the feedback from that they gave to you basically is we're sick and tired of being observed.
The feedback they gave to us was that they just no longer wish to participate in the study.
Okay, so on the conclusion of the study, the figures for a longitudinal study over 10 weeks is based on the observations of the rubbish behaviour for 5 families in Manarewa and Papakura.
This particular study is, yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting because do you think that there is a potential for a bit of an observational error given the very, very small sample size over 10 weeks, given that we're talking 5 families?
What we measured were actual kilos. So.
Okay, well, the kilos of rubbish weighed from 5 families over 10 weeks. That's basically what that study is, isn't it? 5 families over 10 weeks weighing their rubbish.
Yes.
Okay. In your, going back to the slide, level of support from submissions, you made this comment, 47% of submitters either supportive or don't know. This, stop, yep. 47% of submitters either supportive or don't know. 37% of submitters are supportive. Why would you assign the balance and loop that in? It creates the impression of there might be more support than what you've identified through the submissions. There's only 37% of support from the submissions, but you're saying 47% either supportive or don't know. I don't say 63% either opposed or don't know. I say 53% opposed, 37% in favour. Is a representation of 47% either supportive or don't know, does that have the potential to create a misconception as to the real level of support out there?
Just to respond to that, we found that a lot of people who ticked don't know or other, they had some supportive points and they said, we are supportive, but we wonder if other people will cope. So there were often a lot of comments around some conditional support, I guess you would call it. So that's how we've interpreted those results.
If I beat my opponent by 53 to 37, I'll take that and hope to do better another day, but I have to just say, well, I got 53 and the opposition got 37. I'm just wondering if it would have been better to simply say, well, the majority were opposed and a minority were supportive, and just don't assign the balance, because it creates a perception as to where that support might fall when you really can't bank that, can you?
We did find, as I said, that a lot of those conditional supports really did voice points aligned with those people who supported the proposal. So there was more in common with the people who supported the proposal than those who didn't. So we felt because of that alignment, it made more sense to include them in that group.
Okay, well, look, you and I will have a different interpretation of that. Can I just confirm, because you made the statement, you know, unparalleled flexibility, does that unparalleled flexibility now extend to Kāinga or not? Are they committed to offering the 240 litre wheelie bin for the 3-bedroom tenancies?
Yes, we met with the operational managers and the regional managers very recently, and for all 3+ properties, they said that they had a 240 litre bin.
And does that only apply to the fortnightly option, or they're prepared to offer that in the weekly?
My understanding is that it's offered already.
No, are you sure about that? Because we've spent years arguing about whether Kāinga are actually committed to offering the 240 litre wheelie bin as a standard level of service for a 3-bedroom tenancy.
Through the chair, I would check that, because I don't know if that's their policy as a standard. You're right, Councillor Newman. What the conversations we've had at even the regional director levels is to ensure that there is sufficient capacity for their residents as of need. And they have also said that they would want to be, if there is a trial that we do, they would want to be part of the trial to see how their residents actually go with the fortnightly service. So in terms of the policy shift, to by ad hoc, by provision, by default providing a 240 litre to a 3-bedroom, I would check that.
So the answer at the moment is that the service is not offered at a 240 litre for a 3-bedroom tenancy. Do you want to just check that? Because that is the standard position as we've talked. Okay, thank you. And the one other question that I had, I just wanted to go back to the local board's position. So 13 opposed. I'm trying to go through the report back here. 13 opposed and four were what? Thirteen were definitely opposed. 4 were, well, they weren't supportive because only 1 was supportive. Which local board was supportive again? Hibiscus and Bays, was it?
Hibiscus and Bays, yep.
Okay. Well, maybe they can have the trial. But so the four. What did? What's their view?
So through the chair, there were 5 local boards that did not support either for their specific area or for specific types of collections. So not, for example, in business areas or the city centre. So those kind of conditional kind of elements to their feedback.
Okay, so is that sort of... Okay, so we'll just say 13 definitely opposed, 1 in favour, and 4 offering variations and yep, okay, all right. Thank you, Chair. Maybe others will have more questions. I've got some more to think up.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, I just want to get a few things here. The food scraps bins at present, you're saying around 33% or so. Do you have that data broken down for local boards?
No, unfortunately, we don't have it by local board area. We are working on that, however. We do have it by contract area, I believe.
Because I'm not quite like Councillor Newman and Doorknock, but I do enormous walking with dogs. And every Thursday morning, I take a counter with me and go down different streets to count how many food scraps there are out, because it's our collection day, relative to red tops. We're running at about 26%. And I can tell you that the variation across the households that I've talked to, because it's the biggest talked about issue, is the plan to get rid of the week, is there are retired elderly people who live alone that said, I could cope easily with one every fortnight, for goodness sake. I can fill my bin about a quarter. But I can tell you there are heaps of families with university student kids and friends coming back or staying, or our house sometimes has 7 in it and sometimes 2, that just say, this is a fundamental service of council. If you were to list what are the roles and functions of council in a prioritised order, rubbish comes bloody close to the top. And we've seen a whole range of diminution of service. The parks used to be mowed a lot more than they are now. They used to be mowed with a catcher. They're not. There's grass everywhere on people's shoes and it's grass this long, or else it's mowed and it's sitting everywhere. And people are now saying, I'm sick and tired of seeing our rates go up year on year on year, quite substantial increase. But you keep talking of taking away another service that's core role and function of what you're supposed to be there for. Now, I understand why there are some people that could cope easily with fortnightly. I bet you they would have no problem at all. But I will alert councillors around here. I've been in politics a long time and I've spotted bloody landmines sticking out of the sand. This will explode. In terms of public perception of a core role and function.
Councillor Williamson, just a quick, make sure turn into a question.
Okay, well, then I want to get back to your surveys in terms of the sums of, let's go with the costs of money. Some locals have now done some inquiries that they've informed me to see if they can get a second size bin, a 240 rather than the whatever the little one is. There's a lot more cost to do that. It costs a lot more per year to do it. If you go to once every fortnight and let people have the bigger bins, will they be paying that extra cost?
Through the chair, the different size bins will have a different price for them. So the fortnightly will be cheaper than a weekly collection, but it will be like if you say if your weekly costs $2.90, the fortnightly for the same size would cost lesser. But the variance between an 80 and a 120 and a 240 would exist.
Okay, so I want to get that right. So someone who's got this, let's go, I'm going to go small and big. You've got a small and you're paying a certain amount per annum in your rates for that bin. Yeah. If you want to get the bigger bin now, forget the fortnight, you're just going to bigger bin, you'll go up dramatically in terms of your cost.
That's correct, Chair. There's a fee that you had agreed to that is paid for the exchange of the bin, yep, which is about $40. And I think in terms of the size, the smallest is a 80 litre, which is 140 or something. The next one is 170 and a 200 plus.
So if you then say to people, look, the way to sell this, because I think it would at least get you halfway there, we're going to let you have a bin that's twice as big as you've got. It will only be collected every fortnight, but that shouldn't affect you. You've still got the amount of capacity that you had before. And you're there, oh, well, yeah, maybe. But we're going to charge you a hell of a lot more for that. That just won't sell. If you just said, we'll let you have a bigger bin and we'll only collect fortnightly, I think a lot of people would say, well, it's not got smelly stuff in it because I'll stick smelly stuff in the food scraps bin and so on. And so you're giving me the same capacity, it's just a half as frequent collection. I can probably live with it. I'm not saying they will, but I think it would be a lot more saleable. But if you then say, well, we'll let you have the bigger bin when you go to fortnightly, but you're going to pay a lot more for that. I can't sell this. I literally couldn't sell it to my constituents.
Through you, Chair, what we have found in the rates-funded areas is that people are putting out their current capacity bins weekly, but they're not full. So there might be some situations where they are full now, where they may not be recycling or getting the material out that can go in the other bins as of now. But a lot of them, and I think the team talked about that study where they've looked at those bins are half or, they're not quite full. And if you go to a rates-funded area a user pays area like out West Auckland, when they put it out, it's actually quite full because they pay every time the bin goes out and they don't put it out weekly.
I have a collection of red lid bin photos that I've done for this. I'll send them all to you. 45-degree angled lids as you're walking along the road. Packed to the gunnels weekly. You want to say that every 2 weeks? We will die on the altar of purity of this.
Thank you. And just, it's an important issue and the questions are fine, but can we just make sure that the staff are here because we are legally required to show how we will reduce Auckland's waste and individual household waste under the law, under successive governments, going, 2 decades now. So we just need to acknowledge that the staff are here doing what we've asked them to do for quite some time. So the questions are important, but all of us need to understand it's not the staff just coming up with this for any sort of fun reason. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to ask you a question a different way for Councillor Williamson. So my first question, sorry, what is the rates reduction that people would get if they had a fortnightly rubbish collection? What's the rates reduction? Is it $20 a year?
Through you, Chair, the numbers that we have done in the past in terms of modelling, what is the difference between a weekly and a fortnightly collection was about $10 million, more than $10 million for OPEX across the city. So you can look at dividing that and saying what would be the difference between those rates. But the greater opportunity exists when we go to market again for our collections. Because by that time, you will know exactly what resources are required and how can that cost come down because you're not putting trucks back on the road for a weekly collection every week. And this does not take into consideration any cost savings that you might have on the wear and tear of the roads that we have in the city as well.
Yeah, I suppose what I was trying to say here is if you had a rates reduction because you only put your bin out a fortnight and you wanted a bigger bin, would the rates reduction plus the bigger bin have a net zero balance? That's what I was trying to say.
Yes, it would.
And I think that's what Councillor Williamson was trying to get to. Okay. Now, my next question is...
So maybe, Deputy Mayor, just to clarify what everyone's saying. At the moment, there's 3 different costs for the big, the small, big, and the medium. All those 3 costs would drop, and the idea that would be that the top bin would not cost more than the single bin twice, if you know what I mean. We would make sure that so there wasn't a
net benefit. Yeah, and that's the key message, Morris. That's the key message if you did go that part. But my next question is, there's been a number of changes in the handling of our waste in the last few years. Obviously, reduction in bins and parks, which the local board supported, moving to the food scraps and the upcoming changes to tags in some areas. And more importantly, the government's standardisation of recycling, which means fewer things can go in the recycling bins and more in the red bin. When would be a good time to know the impact of those changes? Because, or maybe I put it a different way, do we know the impact of those changes yet? I don't think we probably do, because I think it's important to know that. And if we waited, would we then know what the issue was before we could go and make a decision whether we went to fortnightly?
Through you, Chair, the changes, even if we decide today that we are going to go to a fortnightly, the earliest we go to fortnightly is February 2027. So we do have a bit of time for that to come into play. In terms of the changes that the city is seeing at the moment, with food scraps, we've already seen that behavior change and the amount of material that's come out. The recycling standardization has seen some products go into the landfill bin because it's a smaller list of what can be recycled. So that shift has already we can see that shift already. And in terms of the litter bins, I did ask that question of my colleagues, and I don't know whether we have seen any shift in terms of what's going into your rubbish bin, or whether that we are seeing any shift in litter because of that.
I suppose what I'm saying is I don't believe I've got all the data and the information I need to make a fortnightly decision now, because I don't know the impact of those changes. Okay, and could you just confirm again, if we do a trial, how would we measure that success?
So we've put in the parameters attachment to the report. I think it's perhaps J, yes, how we would assess the trial. So there's a number of measures of success that are listed against each of the objectives of the trial. So the objectives around addressing key concerns of Aucklanders. We want to make sure we get baselines for these measures of success, and also obviously through and at the assessment period, understand how those concerns of Aucklanders have changed. Similarly, with the reductions in waste that we expect to see, the increase in food scraps usage, the increase in the recycling, etc.
And okay, thank you, Chair. I don't want to. I'll just stop. I'll give you the last one. But if you went for a trial and the results were not favourable, would then you suggest that we didn't go to fortnightly, we stayed with weekly?
Through the chair, that decision definitely is back to committee, and we would share the outcomes and get that decision back to you to say whether that's a good idea still or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and rest your voice by the sounds of it. Deputy Chair, Councillor Dalton.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, ladies. It was an excellent presentation, and thank you for fielding these questions that are coming your way. I'm going back to illegal dumping. If you could assess for residential dumping of the Auckland residential population, could you assess what the percentage would be of residential dumping that we have? 1% of the population?
Through the chair, we do have some stats. We're just pulling them up.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Just wanted to try and get some context, because we're talking about the implementation of a policy. And if we're going to not implement a policy because only a couple of % of the population are not doing what the 98% of the population are doing, that would be flawed.
Through the chair, we might need to come back to you on that one, but yeah, as a percentage of the population, the tonnage is small, but we would need to come back with exact figures on that.
I just need so we wouldn't get that information today. So I'm sorry, I thought that I had asked for it once before. Just trying to contextualise it. If I think about my ward, of which Manurewa has the highest illegal dumping, and say the population's 100,000, and I don't know if there are 1,000 people dumping illegally. It seems a lot to say that. So we're not saying 50% of the residential population are legally dumping, and it's going to.
I found the information, if that's helpful.
Thanks.
Yep, so we looked at illegal dumping tonnage as a percentage of total herbicide collection rubbish, and it ranges between 0.6% and 1%.
Thank you. So illegal dumping, the impact, even if it doubled under fortnightly collections, would be 2%. So actually opposing the implementation of a policy based on what 2% of the population are doing would be flawed in my view. I mean, it wouldn't be good policy making. That's really helpful. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the Deputy Mayor stole my exact question, literally word for word. But I just think we need to get this on the record, because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in the public. Rubbish collection is cost recovery, isn't it? So we don't gain money from that.
That's correct. It is cost recovery. Whatever the service, whatever we pay for the service is what we charge in rates.
Thank you. So if we're talking about saving $10 million annually, say, because I know it's complicated, right? But say 10 million annually, that would go pretty much straight to people's rates bills, right? And people would get a rates reduction. That's true, right?
That's right. So as I said, if the service costs us X million, that is what we pay for in the rates. So we do not make any savings as a council, but that lesser cost is what is charged to the customer.
So this is yet another dichotomy of service levels versus rates, right? Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you. Rates, roads and rubbish is the mantra I was told that local government is meant to be about. And we don't do roads anymore, that's Auckland Transport, but we certainly are responsible for rubbish. So this is a very important responsibility that we're dealing with. Now, I understand you've, in order to ascertain public opinion, you've used a special consultative procedure. I have some views on how the council uses this and refers to it, but what would be different about your consultation and a normal have your say type approach if you are indeed working under the special consultative procedure?
Through the chair, just to clarify, are you talking about doing the trial to get feedback?
I understand the engagement was you used a special consultative procedure. So was there any hearings, for instance, formal hearings from people?
Yes, we aligned exactly with the process that was used for the annual plan, and we held those hearing events for organisations or anyone who wanted to talk.
Okay. In my view, that's not particularly special, but anyway, be that as may, you had feedback, 2,737 submission, though somewhere else it's referred to as 2,683, but that may be accounting, the first figure may be in tick box forms or whatever, so let's assume that, but that's 2,737 out of the last count, and this is a wee bit out of date, 545,127 households, so it's not overwhelming, but be that as it may, you had positive responses, direction of draft plan 66%, construction and demolition, waste priority 79%, priority waste matters, organics, plastics, etc., 70%, advocating for a beverage container return 72%, pretty overwhelming, fortnightly rubbish collection 50% opposed and only 41% supporting. And essentially this is, all the other things are very worthy and supportable, but this is the one that's going to impact on people, households directly. And it looks like the feedback, which is very small, limited, because I don't really think a special consultative procedure was undertaken, is extremely limited given the number of people who will be affected. And coming back to the local boards, the boards in my area oppose this. So could, in light of these figures, do you find that does not indicate public support for reducing the rubbish collection service?
Through the chair. So these are the results as we've presented them to you, as the results that we received from those submissions. We are also out in the community a lot, hearing from communities as to what else they would like, or what frequency of rubbish. We get many requests to us for a less frequent service, down to a monthly service. We've just going out at the moment into to West Auckland, where we have had an overwhelming, so not overwhelming, but a number of requests for bin changes, and all of those have been requests for smaller bins, going from, of the last 100 requests that we received, 80 of those were for going from a medium-sized bin to a small bin, and 20 of those were from going from a large bin to a medium-sized bin. So we are trying to balance multiple views from multiple people. So as many requests or feedback that we get that people may not be able to cope or may struggle to cope, we get equally numbered on a daily basis requests for people to say why we are not introducing a less frequent service because they don't need it after using their food scraps bin or they compost at home. So we're trying to make and balance those views and those feedbacks, partly based on this, is what we've displayed quite clearly in front of you, but also then understanding what the feedback is more generally from the population and the surveys that we've done and the evidence that we've presented to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And now the Mayor has to head off. He's going to try and join online, but he just wanted to say something quickly.
Very tricky area. If you save something, it's 0.5% of wages. It says 0.5% of rate, so it's could be quite an incentive. I think a trial is the only way we should even think about this. And I'm trying to think of who deserves a trial around here. Be good or you'll get a trial. No. But then again, it's a saving or not a saving, you know, and I just think about the dynamic lanes at Whangaparā that nobody wanted, but everybody loves them now. So a trial's not a bad idea. And if it turns to shit quickly, we'll really reverse it. You know, there'll be such a lot of noise, but you have to go for a little bit to get through. There's always going to be noise, and it'll settle. And we did some changes in another place where I used to live, and we have the advantages here. There isn't a nearby forest everywhere, as there is in Northland. And it's harder to get rid of a pile of stuff. But on the other hand, the people in Fowl Creek manage to put the same stuff in there every year, because when we go out with sea cleaners, we pull the same stuff in the same place in the same number. You think, did we not pick this stuff up last year? And so we can't, just because a certain number of our population are going to behave badly, I don't think it is a reason why we shouldn't try something good on the rest of them. And if the rest of them behave badly, we'll know it's a dumb idea. So you've laid out something or others. A lot of councils have done it. I think that the picture you showed up that was most compelling was all the councils that have done it, you know. Should we not try doing something new because we're a bit scared of it? Where was that? It was quite stunned, that. I've even heard of a lot of those places, so it's...
18 of them.
Yeah. So I'm going to vote in favour of the trial. I'll probably be harpooned by one or two of the councils for doing that, but you're all entitled to make a mistake, including me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, should we just move an extension of time now? Councillor Ferry will second. All those in favour? Aye. And now I think we also have to move electronic attendance by the Mayor, because he'll join.
Move.
And Councillor Williamson would like to vote no to the extension of time. I'll move. Councillor Ferry will second, allowing the Mayor to be sent the electronic link, because he's going overseas. No, not going overseas. He's just going across to the office. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. Thank you. Okay, back to questions. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies, congratulations to getting us here. It's only been 12 years. Can you tell me, Auckland Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2024, does that include input from our community and during a consultation about food scraps?
So in terms of the questions that we put out on the feedback form, we didn't have a specific question to the community on the food scraps, but there was certainly a lot of commentary on the food scraps. So some people finding it really good, some mixed views.
And did you gather any statistics around the food scraps, whether they was whether it be local boards or anybody else around supporting the priorities? Because in the report that the majority supported the priorities, except for the fortnightly rubbish collection. So can you sort of let us know what the consultation was back, albeit general?
So one of the priorities in the plan is around organic materials, and there was certainly a lot of support from the public and local boards around reducing organic materials in many different ways. So that attracted a lot of attention, of course, from a number of organisations as well who work in that space, something that iwi, Parakora, Marae were very keen to see. So generally very well supported direction.
It's good to hear they supported the food scripts. I'm going to ask questions on the process that could be available, well, that could be done around a trial. Now, what would the process be to select the 3 areas? I mean, we've already heard some councillors around this table saying, no, I don't want it in our area. And I've spoken to Council Fully, that Manukau Ward would be one of the areas to be trialled because of the demographics. I don't know whether there's any other wards that are going to put their particular ward through, but what is the selection process for the 3 wards or areas, sorry?
So just as a sweetener, people will get a rebate on their rates if they are in the trial. So it's not that they will pay the same amount as the others are. So that's as a starting point. In terms of the trial, what we are wanting to do, the idea is to get a good mix and a good representative sample of where those communities are, because it's no point in doing an area where you've got food scraps happening really well and people have got less waste. There's no idea in doing that. The intention is to actually choose areas that give you representation of how well it can work. The second part is we also have to see operationally what is feasible, because we do not want to have a very costly trial. So to make sure that it's done well, we have to work with our operators to pick areas where we can do them really well. So those considerations are quite key, and I think the idea would be for the team to actually make those decisions in terms of where we feel it gives us the best results in terms of understanding what needs to happen, but also operationally is more feasible.
I think, I mean, like I said, I just was more around the process, but there is the ward that has been put in front of you. Now, the process will be, again, around selecting the 3,000 to 4,000 households. Because I want to have a look at the criteria, because what I've been hearing so far and what I've read is that it's the bigger families that have concerns around their current 120 litre rubbish bin won't handle the extra rubbish on a fortnightly basis. So again, just the process around that is just going to be left to the team to select families or ainga who have 4 or more, 8 or more. I heard that mentioned earlier. What's the process for that, please?
The challenge we will have is we cannot select properties based on how many people are there. We'll have to select an area, which would have a mixture of families that may be small, medium, large. And that is what will have to go, because operationally that is what will be feasible. But the areas in terms of process, what the team would look at is to say, here is a ward area that gives us that mix and gives us the representation of what we're looking for.
My last one, Chair. Is there a possibility with those 3,000 to 4,000 households, but now it's in an area, that they would be given a 240 litre bin over the trial period to see whether in fact from them as families, and given for free, not to, hey, look, let's pay X amount. Is that a possibility? Because I think you'll have a better indication based on the consultation results that these family will have the bigger bin and over a 2-week period will end up saying, hey, this actually could work for us. So is that an option?
Yeah, I think what we would try and replicate is what other areas have done. And so there's a settling in period where we may say, for example, try with your existing bin and see and maximise your recycling and food scraps and see how you get on. What we do know, for example, is when people have more volume, they fill more volume. So we do know that from evidence of previous experiences. So, but what we would need to do, because this is a trial, is then say, right, if after an amount of time you're really not coping, let's keep in contact and we'll make sure then we can then switch to a 240 litre bin. That works and then go that way. So this is an option to try different bins. If we do have families there that we know would fall into that category of which we believe wouldn't be able to cope, we would initiate that right from the outset.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Councillor Watson.
Oh, what a minefield, eh? The first point I'd make, I think someone mentioned 12 years. I think there's a lot of progress has been made over 12 years when I compare the situation up where I am to what it was before, little blue bins. I don't know, Peru, if that was Rodney or Auckland was right. You know, it's a quantum change. So I think, and people have adapted over time, and there's a lot more stuff getting recycled now. In fact, that's the busiest bin. So just a couple of things that just occur to me. You know, generally in the past, if I've had complaints with changes, it's been two things. One, someone says I'm not going to use it. No, I don't need to use it. And the other one, person has worked it out to the exact cent how much more they're going to be paying. You know, and increasingly now there's people on fixed incomes. You know, that's where their lives are. They do check those sort of things. So, in terms of the cost, then, so the cost with the fortnightly collection doesn't go up if you stay on your own. Stay with your 120 litre, what it is, and you go to fortnight. Your cost should come down a little bit. If you think, well, no, that's as a lot of people also are at their optimum. You know, they're pretty efficient in what they do, and they think, well, no, I can't work with that. I'll have to go up to the 240. Then they're going to end up paying quite a bit more. Did you give a figure to Councillor Williamson about on how the dollar term value of that? No, we don't have that yet.
We do have rates as what they are now. So, yeah. I mean, annual rate for a 240 is maybe $240 or $90. Yeah. So it's in terms of an annual fee for a whole year, that is what it is. So it'll be less than that. Yeah. So.
Shouldn't it be less because it's getting picked up less?
Yes, it will be less in comparison to the weekly one, as you said. Yeah. If it's the same size, a comparative analysis of the weekly versus fortnightly is definitely lesser. But if you're going from a 120 to a 240, that is when the cost is higher. And that is what we are wanting to say, that whether it is to look at what you've got in that rubbish bin, yeah. And you can actually get a larger recycling bin for free or a second food scraps bin. So it is just looking at what is actually in your bin that actually can be diverted to other bins or taken to facilities for recycling as well. Okay, so one pragmatic thing that occurs to me, and I don't know if you're able to measure that, is people who miss their rubbish collection. So, if you miss a weekly collection, well, there's one coming up the next week. If you miss a fortnightly collection, then it's once a month, and we maybe run into problems as a consequence. Do we have statistics in terms of what percentage of people, do that, given a lot of people got busy lives and maybe aren't all that well organised? Through the chair, we do not have statistics offhand. I don't think we get a lot of people saying they've missed their fortnightly recycling collection. And with the whole idea of having food scraps weekly, so you're actually putting things that might smell in that weekly cycle in any case. So what's in your rubbish bin is quite inert, and that can possibly sit for a little longer, unless you have kids with disposable nappies, which we are also looking at, or medical waste, which we are looking at supporting people with as well. Okay, so final question, Mr. Chair, and it goes to the weekly food scraps, which I think is the figure that's bandied around there is 33%, which surprises me. I thought it would be
higher than that because I think it's been quite successful as a convert. Why do you think that uptake, other than the obvious one that people have got the grinders in a lot of modern kitchens now, and they think that's what that's the best way to get rid of your food? Why do you think that uptake has been, relatively low by comparison?
The 33% is the set out rate. That means that people putting out bin every week that use the service. There may be some others that don't do it every week and have a greater participation, and we know the participation rate from the community is greater. But we also believe, as I said earlier, councils that went for food scraps together with a fortnightly rubbish collection did have a greater uptake. It was that reason because you don't have that alternative. And some people who are not motivated to separate were actually then motivated to do it because they wanted the smelly elements of what's in their rubbish bin out rather than it sitting there in their house.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And just the first year of target for the food scraps was 18,000 tonnes, and we did 20,000 tonnes. So it hopefully will go up. But I think it is the people using it weekly. Sometimes we'll put ours out weekly, but sometimes might be every second. So I might have only been counted in that one. Sorry, Councillor Newman's next. I just might ask one question on that. My sister just moved to Taranaki and they were already on fortnightly and food scraps. And so because she kind of had no choice to change, she obviously suddenly is now using the food scraps straight away. Is that, how much higher is the food scrap use in those councils that went straight to fortnightly and food scraps on day one?
So through the chair, we know from Hamilton, for example, our closest neighbour and quite comparable in terms of a city, obviously on a much smaller scale, but their participation rate was up nearing around 40-45% when they first rolled out, and sometimes even up to 50%. So it varies over time, and as people come and go, but with that service going out at the same time, it was higher.
And just to add to that, the evidence shows that if you just keep on a weekly collection, the food scraps usage does decline over time, which is why if we stayed with a weekly collection, we will need to put a bit more into our communications and engagement to try and drive that behaviour change. So that additional service of a food scraps, to make that a success, we think that fortnightly collections will be a really powerful incentive.
And how many litres again is the food scraps bin?
That is 23 litres.
23 litres. So
Yep.
I guess it's important to think too, we've added 56 litres a fortnight to people's rubbish as well. So.
And if there are families that need a second bin, that is available as well. So it's technically you can have 46 litres.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Point of order, aren't we on questions? So haven't you already asked some questions? Don't we usually only get one round of questions?
I'm happy to allow second round.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
I just haven't had my turn yet, getting grumpy. It's all right.
Councillor Newman. Yeah.
No, if there are people that haven't asked questions, they should be allowed to go before I do.
Oh, right.
In
Sorry.
my
Yeah.
view.
Councillor Ferry. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Right. So, just on you mentioned before the system about medical needs. I'm quite interested in that and how that might apply to, in Pearl, you just mentioned just before, I wrote this down feels like about 3 hours ago, nappies, technically not a medical need, but what would that potentially look like in terms of what have other councils used around a system around medical needs which may or may not apply to nappies? Because I think that's something I've had raised a bit, particularly nappies.
Yeah, through the chair. So the example that we gave is from Dunedin City Council. They shifted all of their services on the 1st of July this year. So it's still early days yet, but what they have introduced is the option for having an additional medium-sized bin. They only have two size bins, 120 or 80, so medium or small. And on the presentation of a note from your doctor just saying, yes, there's a need. There's no personal information that's disclosed. It's literally just a process just to say, yeah, there's a demonstrated need, and then they are given an additional bin.
Okay, but it'd be unlikely that people would get a medical note for nappies.
So for nappies, Central Otago, for example, what they do, they shifted, I think the middle of last year, and what they did was then people with families, they asked them to try and cope for the first 3 months of the shift, and if they genuinely couldn't cope, to come back, and then they gave them the option of having an extra 120 litre bin. And I think to note there for that's that end of life. Obviously, that need passes, the children grow up, but clearly there is also a need, for if you've got elderly people in the household as well. So it's just being sensitive, and the trial would enable us to trial that.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in us understanding that better through the trial. Obviously, nappies are not, as you point out, not just necessarily babies. They can apply for adults as well. But also, one of the things I'm aware of, yes, is that there are other ways that people use nappies, and also actually technically, and I have to be honest, I never did this when we had nappies, but technically you are actually supposed to scrape out the smelly stuff and put it down the toilet, even with disposable nappies. Very few people do that, but yeah. So there is some an education piece there potentially as well. I'd be curious as well, acknowledging that this Dunedin stuff is quite new. I'd be curious to understand as well whether people, one of the things we run up against in the benefit system is people having to, re-get a medical note, reprove that they have a disability, for example. And I think we would hate to end up in a situation where we had people who clearly were going to, had medical needs for the rest of their life, and every year they had to go and get a doctor's note. So that would be another thing I'd appreciate us exploring. These are, I know there's sort of a bit of scoffing around the table, but for the people who this is an issue for, it's an issue of dignity as well. And it's actually really important that we get this right, even though it might be a relatively small number of people. The next question I had was, there was a lot of concern when we changed the inorganic system. And I've seen, and I wasn't on governing body at the time, but I was on a local board, I've seen a lot of the concerns and around that sort of dissipate as people have found that the system by and large works. Is there, what have we sort of learnt from that and applied to this process? Because, on the face of it, the idea of a collection where you put everything out, people can, pick and mix and collect their own stuff before the collectors come around, that does look like quite a good idea. But then actually, the way that we've done it with, you book it and all that kind of stuff has actually worked out quite well. So what have we learnt from that we've applied to this?
Through the chair, there wasn't a specific question in terms of asking the community on this, but if I think about the plan and what it is proposing to do is to move to that community recycling centres model, where people can take the material on an ongoing basis. And with the inorganic collections, we do push people to say, if you've got stuff that is actually good to donate, take gifts to somebody, just please do that, because you don't want the rain falling on it. But if you still have material that you want to put out for collection, it is put out in a neat manner, and it is actually taken away, as you know, by a 2-truck model where you've got product that is going to warehouses or even to CRCs directly to then be rehomed, and then you've got the other rubbish that actually gets compacted and goes to landfill. The participation rates are not massive there, but not everybody has got material every year. So you might have inorganic material, you might have a bed to dispose of this year and nothing next year. I think the participation rate at the moment sits at about 21%. So that's just how many people book it, but they are reminded quite regularly. So if you've booked it once, you'll get a reminder in your email next time. So it's quite an easy process to do that.
Yeah, I've found it very easy. Just checking then the link with that with illegal dumping, because that was the other concern around that, and that is a concern that's coming up again with this. My observation is that a lot of illegal dumping is items that are the kind of thing you would need to get rid of in the inorganic. You couldn't actually get rid of through your bin, your rubbish bin. Mattresses and TVs are the classic ones. So did we see with that inorganic, did we see an impact on illegal dumping? And in that space, because I know that we've got other initiatives around illegal dumping as well. Are we prepared to ramp those up if we do find that there's an increase in illegal dumping in those trial areas?
I can just address one point that what that inorganic collection did when it was on the curb, it actually attracted people from outside to come and dump. And sometimes we found commercial material dumped alongside a
Yes.
residential, and suddenly we went, this can't be coming out of this house. So that stopped because it was no longer on the curb and it went into the property. And in terms of our illegal dumping stats, they've kind of, as we said, remained in a bit of a rhythm rather than having a peak. But we are very keen through this plan, but also with the new set of the council structure to see how we actually do things collectively for illegal dumping. That's quite a key aspect in the plan, and looking at how we do it better for the city. So that is a absolute priority.
Yeah. And does that include, I'm pretty sure it does, but just remind me, does that include cracking down on some of that more commercial illegal dumping? So we had a whole lot of tyres dumped in a park. Nobody has 50 tyres on their residential property. Are we doing more about that kind of stuff as part of the plan?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're also looking at what can we do with dumping on private land, which is, I know, is a pain as well. So working in with licensing and compliance, also with community facilities and the waste team as a collective to see what can we do better with our contractors, which may at the moment have boundaries, but actually how do we make sure that is not happening that way, and we have a much more seamless service in that space. Just as an example of tyres, we've had the tyre product stewardship scheme that's come in, which is really good, which we have actually advocated for many, many years, because you want to put the right design to actually have product go back for recycling or disposal rather than it getting dumped. So that's a good way to address some of those elements.
Yeah, and acknowledge we were waiting for some central government leadership in the tyre space. It's a really tricky one.
Right.
I've just got two more questions, one of which is hopefully very short, because I just am checking a figure because I don't think I heard it properly before. I'm not sure if I got it right. So for people who go for the 240 litre bin instead of the 120, and this is the rubbish bin, not the recycling bin, how much extra do they pay per year on their rates? Was that, I think I heard $40, but I just want to check.
The $40 is for the exchange of the bin size. That's a one-off fee that you pay. But the ongoing charge we're just checking, I think that charge is there in terms of what that is.
Yeah, so the 120 litre bin is 174.77 in your rates, and the 240 litre bin is currently 287.03.
And that's annually?
Yes.
Annually, yeah.
Okay, so $40 to swap bins, and then there's an ongoing charge that sounded like it was about 110. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not double, but it's just...
No. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And the final thing was, quite a lot of what we've been hearing here in terms of what the evidence and the data shows is that actually potentially quite a lot of people could cope with fortnightly, and a lot of the feedback is they're potentially worried about other people not being able to. We get this sometimes, right? We get feedback where people go, I could do it, but I'm worried about my neighbour, and that's actually quite sweet. What I was wondering is, during the trial period, if that's what goes ahead, and I think it should at this point, is it possible that we could put out some messages outside of the trial area, or even identify some secondary trial areas or something, where we said to people, hey, this change could be coming, we could be shifting to fortnightly, why don't you try only putting your bin out on the weeks it's full? And get people to sort of start that mentality of I don't need to put it out every week if it's not full, and we could potentially do a bit of measuring then about actually, are we in those areas where we are doing that piece of education work, are we seeing people able to take that up? Or are they still having to put out full bins? I think that would be a really useful point of comparison. And I know that on the Waste Political Advisory Group, which I've been on, you've shown us some data about 80% or more of bins going out less than half full, I think it was, off the top of my head.
No,
so testing that.
It was only about 2% of all bins going out full. It was
something like that, yeah. But if we potentially had a sort of secondary trial, which was actually just a messaging trial, where we said, hey, in these 10,000 households, how about we test that message? Then that would be another soft way of testing it. Does that sound like something we could do to turn that into a question?
Yes, we can definitely consider it.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, if you were to go ahead later on with a region-wide rollout of fortnightly, it would be subject again to further consultation.
Yes.
So that would certainly help spread that message, I guess, and the buy-in to that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And just I had a text from Deputy Mayor around, why do we not maybe know the costs exactly? But part of the issue is when these things roll out, the costs will always be different, especially at fortnightly, and especially because even the government waste levy over this time goes up and up. So it's hard to give the public an accurate cost now that might change because the overall cost of, which is probably another reason why we need to think about how we reduce those costs, because those costs we don't control are going to continue to go up. Councillor Newman?
Yes, back to me. Hello. A couple of points. So you just responded in your answers to the opportunities with the inorganic collection service and the community hub. Going a little bit wide here, but the old service was available and very convenient to 100% of households involved simply by dropping their inorganic rubbish at the berm, which would be picked up. When we switch to the new service, that's based on a booking. So, I mean, what percentage of households are taking that up? Is it 10%, 20%, 30%? Approximately what is the percentage of households that are taking up the option of booking for a collection?
So the percentage of participation rate at the moment sits at 21.4%, as I said earlier, and that's at 131,000 bookings. But as I said, not every household has material to put out every year. So you might have people coming back, using it 1 year and maybe not having it the next year. In terms of how many people used it previously, I wouldn't be able to give you that, but also the fact that I may have put some material out, my neighbor may not have, but then you've got others that have dumped material that is on my berm and not actually mine.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting theory, but the point being a service which was readily convenient to 100% of households is now a service which is being booked by 6% of households. The second point, just to confirm in relation to bin switching, that is an option for the ratepayer, isn't it? It's not available necessarily for the tenant. It's available to the person who pays the rates.
That's correct.
So that switch option isn't available to everybody, is it? It's only available to tenants if their landlord agrees.
That's correct, because if it's a rates-funded area and that's the person paying the bill, then it is to the ratepayer. You're right.
So we're moving to a rate-funded scheme everywhere. But okay, the famed $10 million of savings. Can you point to a recent example of contracted services where your renegotiation of the contract for service provision actually resulted in a very significant discount compared to the previous baseline?
I wouldn't be able to tell you one off the head because we haven't changed the service level in that context. So it depends on if you're changing the service level, and the way we've set the contracts with our providers is if there is a variation in policy, we are able to vary the contract, which actually looks at an open book model, which actually reflects on how many trucks do you need, how many drivers do you need, as an example, and then does the numbers on that. And as we mentioned earlier, the service, the waste collection service is based on cost recovery. So, in terms of what would it cost us is what we would charge.
So in theory, if you have a certain degree of fixed costs here and you get a really big reduction in the amount of rubbish, the actual cost per household could significantly increase as a reward for people. If you've got there's a certain amount of the service has to be a fixed cost. Costs do go up as well, by the way. So if you get a significant level of buy-in here, great. But that fixed cost component, they have to recover it from whoever's left over. I mean, is there a risk here that in fact you don't get the savings? The best you could possibly hope for is that the cost might not increase quite as quickly as what you had initially forecast.
Through the chair, the estimates that we provided earlier were based on conversations with the contractors. However, going forward, we'll have to redo those numbers because timelines have changed. We were looking at that previously, so those were actually based on costs that had come back from the contractors. And I think if we go down the trial path, that'll give you good understanding of what is actually required and how much would it cost us going forward. And that is what we would take into our next procurement as well. Because these contracts are there for a fixed term, and then you would go to market again based on exactly what you need and what resources you need to provide the service.
And two more, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. But with respect to the illegal dumping, so, okay, whether it be 0.6% or 2%, I've been reading through the resolutions of the local boards. The local boards that are raising the spectre of illegal dumping are concerned not so much by the volume of households that might be participating in illegal dumping, but the impact of illegal dumping on the wider community. Don't really care if it's 0.6 or 2%, because 100% of that community, I guess, when they see illegal dumping, will be pissed off by it. So is that something that's factoring into your consideration? You know, it's pollution affecting 100% of the neighbourhood, not just 2%.
Through the chair, I think illegal dumping has been an issue that is not really good, and it's been around in the city for a while. And we are putting in more actions to manage that. So I guess with going fortnightly, what might that impact? We are looking at saying that it might be just a blip and then it goes down. So I think as a city, we do need to think about how we manage illegal dumping and material of what we do with our rubbish collections.
And finally, the trial. You said, well, actually, in terms of the trial area, that would have to talk to it would have to really be driven by what the contractors say. Actually, isn't this driven in part by the results of a consultation? Because you will have to consult with the community for which they will be subjected. Well, I guess they'll be the subject matter that for which we will study them for the next 4 years. We have to consult with that community or communities, don't we? What if they say no?
Through the chair, yes, you're absolutely right. So I guess there is a multi-layer of criteria that we need to consider. One, what does that community represent or what that area represents? But to make the trial efficient, we also have some operational things that we need to consider. You do not want one side of the road having the trial and the other one is on a weekly. That just presents other operational issues. So those are the kind of things that we want our collector to work with us on and pick while we pick an area. If the consultation comes back and says no, we then again come back to you and say this is what's happened before we actually go do the trial. So there are quite a few checkpoints in this to actually before we go and do the trial even. So it's the first, I guess the option here today is in front of you to say yes to the trial. We then develop the trial and look at that consultation with those affected parties or with the households, and then we come back to you again and say this is what we've heard. Are we okay to go ahead and do the trial?
So okay, last question. So we know that 37% of submitters oppose this. And I can't see, apart from one local board area, Hibiscus and Bays, where there was express support for it. That being said, and Councillor Watson's looking nervously, that being said, so we go and consult with the community on, we propose to do a trial and you're going to be on our study list. If they say no, you're going to come back here and say, well, look, they said no, but we conducted the consultation, therefore we've ticked the consultation box, and we can go ahead and do the study in that area anyway.
Through the chair, that's not the intention. I think the process is for you to make that final call on whether we do the trial or not. And I guess, as noted earlier, the people who fed back on the plan is only a small number of Aucklanders. It is not, it's not the vast majority. So the pockets that we pick, people in those areas might be quite favorable where they are making a cost saving with a slight reduction to service. So it just depends on that conversation we have with the community.
Well, thank you very much. We have gone through a lot of questions, and I really feel for the staff. I've got now. I thought I was at the end of questions. Now we're back. I've got Councillor Turner and then Deputy Mayor.
Very quickly, you said earlier that we have a legislative requirement to show that we're trying to reduce waste. Does not the pay-as-you-throw system in West Auckland satisfy that?
We do have a statutory requirement under the Waste Minimisation Act, as all councils do, to minimise waste in our area. The pay-as-you-throw system, and we've brought this to this committee a number of times, did not show that. No, it did not show that there was a demonstrable difference between the pay-as-you-throw mechanism compared with the rates-funded mechanism, and that's the reason why this committee voted for changing to a region-wide rates-funded service, because it provided more benefits than not doing so.
In principle, though, pay as you throw, are you saying that won't satisfy the requirements to show that we're trying to minimise our waste? You're saying that that wasn't accepted?
I mean, maybe just, even though I personally love to pay as you throw because it worked really well for me, but we've made that decision, so it's probably not helpful to go back down that discussion.
Through the chair, I mean, we're happy to provide that detailed evidence-based work that we had done. As a concept, it does, but it is how it is situated within the market we are in. We have a pay-as-you-throw service, but there are subscription services available in the market as well, which actually provide for a different model. So that evidence we can share with you again in terms of what that said and how areas that are rates funded actually were producing less or the same as a pay-as-you-throw area.
Reserve my right to speak, please, Mr. Chair.
Always, of course. Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, last questions. Thanks.
I text it to you. Can you ask, please? I've got no voice.
Oh, have you sent me a message? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. In the 18 councils that do have fortnightly have public feedback for, oh, sorry.
In the 18 councils that do have fortnightly connection, was their initial ask negative and did they go ahead and do it anyway? Or was their initial feedback, yes, we want it?
Yeah, do we have data on whether the councils and communities wanted the change or councils just implemented it anyway?
So for the ones in Canterbury, that was in 2009, so that's too long ago for many of the staff that we asked to really understand what the feedback was. But for the other ones, because they introduced it as a whole package of services altogether, they were often providing an improvement in the services they had already. For example, in Tauranga, their waste collection costs had escalated to almost $500 per household. So they were bringing it back and offering a comprehensive package of services, which has proved really successful. And similarly, there were concerns, however, when we spoke to in New Plymouth, there were concerns both from councillors and from the members of the public about how they would cope and what it would look like. But overall, the whole package of the services they were offering was a reduction in cost, and they were also receiving that food scrap service at the same time. And so they were brought over the line with that one. What they've all reflected was, despite any concerns that were raised at the beginning, most of those dissipated either immediately or within a few weeks of the service being introduced.
And you can see that from the news stories at the time. I've had a look. So there was lots of concern, and then basically it's disappeared. Right. We will, thankfully, we've definitely exhausted all your time and energy, but thank you very much. We'll get you to step back, and then we will have a debate on. Remember, we are debating the trial now, so that the chair's recommendations are no longer moved straight to fortnightly. The recommendations we have are around the trial. Obviously, anyone can move an amendment to move straight to fortnightly. That's open to people. But right, I've got Councillor Turner first.